Welcome to our seminar, and thank you very much for joining and listening to us. What is going to be, I believe, a really important message. If you're in the UK, then a very good evening. If you're in Europe, a good evening. I've got to get this right. If you're in America, then I think it's either lunchtime or afternoon, depending on different time zones. And I know that in New Zealand and in Australia, it is 6:30 in the morning. So thank you very much for coming and giving us your time. My name is Rachel. I came into this world. I'm the co-chair of COFFI. I launched into this world that I had no idea about because I had long COVID, which I have to say is the most hideous, debilitating, scary illness that I can imagine. And I had it in the middle of the global pandemic. Very real symptoms, blistered toes that were incredibly painful, burning back, pins and needles, cold extremities, fatigue where I slept for days, and then insomnia where I didn't sleep for days. And I think at my lowest, when I literally thought I had ruined my life, I met someone who'd recovered, and I realized that recovery might be possible. And I made a decision that if I recovered, then I would then spend my time helping other people. And so, really, the aim of this seminar is to do exactly that, to share some of the science and tools and the things that helped me. In terms of COFFI is a group of international scientists, like some of the best scientists in the world, that are collaborating around post-infection fatigue and other symptoms, and they've been going for 10 years. And the consumer arm is a group of people with lived experience that have got together, and our job is to ask questions of the scientists to help try and make findings more meaningful to people that are ill and people that are trying to support people that are ill, and also to provide input to research and proposals. And so the goal of this seminar is to look at post-exertional malaise, or PEM as it's sometimes called, or PEM, which is a recurrence of symptoms or worsening of symptoms after exertion. And that can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional. And it was certainly the one thing that hindered my recovery. And ultimately, the understanding of it, which I'll share later, was the single biggest contributor to me getting my life back. So this is the seminar that I needed when I was really ill. And I'm joined by three amazing colleagues who I don't even know if they're on the same page because there's so many people that are attending this call. But I've got Fiona, who also works with me as part of the consumer group, Fiona Symington. And I'll let Fiona introduce herself, and then I'll get the other two speakers to introduce themselves. Fiona.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. Hi, everybody. It's really exciting to be here today. So I'm Fiona, and I lived with Emmy for 14 years, and I'm here this evening to talk about what it was like to have post-exertional malaise.
Thank you. And Celia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. So I'm Celia Rema. I worked almost 20 years as a clinician and researcher. Currently is a professor of health psychology at University of Oslo, and also the part of the leadership of the Oslo Chronic Fatigue Consortium. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Can I just say I'm so excited about this? And Becca Kennedy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Becca Kennedy. I'm a family medicine physician in Portland, Oregon, in the States. And I've been a family medicine physician for 25 years, and I've been very interested in lots of health problems that our medical system doesn't understand very well. And I was the lead of the long COVID clinic at Kaiser Permanente Northwest, which is a large health system here with 500,000 members. So I assessed hundreds of people with long COVID. And that's my particular focus now, is understanding how the brain's role in making chronic symptoms happens. And so I focus on not only long COVID and chronic fatigue, but lots and lots of other health conditions as well.
Amazing. And we've got an hour. This is on record, so you will get a recording afterwards. And please do then distribute the recording as well. And also, if you've got any questions, then please just pop them in the chat as you're thinking of them. And we've got time for questions and answers towards the end of the hour as well. And just to talk about my experience as a PEM, it typically seemed to happen about 36 hours. After just physical activity, specifically cycling and walking. But that might have been because after I got really ill, I was just too scared to even think about running. I'm a runner normally. And it seemed to be that after 10 minutes of walking, then I would get symptoms. But looking back only outside and only kind of when I was measuring the activity, and always it started with anxiety, then a very, very well, I looked it up and it said it was a COVID strangle, and then a burning back, and then fatigue. Sometimes it would also happen when I hadn't done a particular activity, but I was told that was a cumulative PEM. And I remember one specific event where I thought I would try cycling, and I planned to do 10 minutes, heart rate not higher than 70, on the flat. And my boyfriend at the time encouraged me to do 15 minutes. And I had the biggest crash 2 days later, and I literally never touched it again, because all the COVID groups talked about the fact that it would create damage, that you had to stay below this kind of threshold if you were ever to get better, and also that if you did crash, there was nothing you could do, but you had to kind of batter down the hatches and go to bed, and that was the best and only thing that you could do. So that's generally what I did. Fiona, I know that you obviously had a lot of experience of PEM. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to sum up in some ways because it was 14 years of my life. So I think really the important thing to say is that I'd lived with tiredness. I'd lived with chronic pain for a very long time before I got a diagnosis of ME. And when I started living with ME, this was a totally new experience. And this was specifically something that happened if I did too much. Sometimes actually doing something, the tiredness would kick in then. But it was very much 1 to 2 days after doing too much. And doing too much could be exercise, but it could also be, talking, having a conversation, having a shower, trying to concentrate too much. And I had no idea initially what this symptom was. And these are some photographs of me when I was ill. I was very pale. I tried initially, because I was at university when I got these symptoms, I tried to push through. I had this sense of, well, I just need to exercise my way out of it. But actually found very quickly that was making things worse. And it got to the point where I was exercising, and then a couple of days later, I was crying with exhaustion. I was so acutely exhausted. And I wanted to touch tonight on, really what were some of those symptoms. And it was extreme exhaustion, but it was also dizziness. It was heart rate problems. It was my glands swelling up. I would start to feel like I was getting a virus, and very real symptoms of a sore throat, headache, feeling hot. And those symptoms sometimes actually disappeared within a few hours, and then maybe I'd get them again for a few days, and they would come and go. And I was yawning constantly, sometimes a sense of desperately needing air and just being so exhausted I couldn't stop the yawning. And, at the very worst, what I remember is having an afternoon nap and sleeping for 1 or 2 hours. And actually waking up and being so incredibly exhausted, I felt I couldn't open my eyes. And I had to lie there for, maybe 15, 20 minutes to try and get up the energy to open my eyes. And there was a lot of anxiety of, how do I get to the bathroom? How do I get to the kitchen? Ended up with a carer because that exhaustion was so severe. And I found a community of people who were all experiencing the same thing, which in lots of ways was a huge relief. And we all stuck together and sort of, we were all living this lifestyle of you get into the habit of you're trying to avoid crashing. You're trying to do everything you can to monitor your energy levels, monitor your body. There's constant talk about, have you had a bad crash after doing something? And this was a group of people, we were desperate to live. So sometimes we were pushing through and we were crashing very badly, and it was very frightening. And one of the key things about it is sort of going to the doctors, and that however bad it gets, and sometimes it really is very bad, you are going to be met with this sense of, well, we don't know what's going on, and you know, go away and rest, and there isn't really any answer. So, you know, post-exertional malaise is a very frightening experience. It's a very real experience, and something which I think it's quite common that people try to push through and really can't. And crucially, I think it's, you know, it's so much more than exhaustion. To me, it felt like I'd swallowed poison. It felt like sometimes, honestly, that I was dying. So a very frightening experience. And something that, you know, for 14 years of my life, I thought that was going to be my experience for the rest of my life.
Fiona, thank you so much for sharing. And I know how difficult that must be to go back through those 14 years. Celia, from your perspective and all the work that you do, what do you believe is going on here?
Good question. So I will share my screen just to show a few slides along my talk. Let's see. Is the picture looking okay now? Yeah. All right. So yeah. So I'm gonna try to say something from the scientific perspective here, and what we know from fairly recent evidence, I would say, that gives some credible and hopeful explanations. So first of all, we have to start with what we are talking about here. So post-exertional malaise, or PEM, is described as the sort of the core symptom of CFSME, and it's also quite commonly reported in people with long COVID, actually also in other disorders like fibromyalgia and cancer survivors. But it involves, like Fiona was saying, a delayed worsening of symptoms after physical or mental activity that is disproportionate to the activity. It can be quite massive to the patient who's experiencing it. It has a prolonged recovery time, lasting hours, days, or weeks or longer. And the worsening of the symptoms are assumed to be caused by the exertion. And as such, activity is typically warned against. So I'm here to offer another scientific explanation of PEM. And I will start from the beginning. So not too long ago, it was widely believed that sensory information is taken from our senses and directed inward into the brain, that the brain was just a passive receiver of information, just like looking through this window like we see here in the picture, that this was how we saw the world through our senses. So we recently learned that this is probably wrong. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world we predict. And this realization came through the discovery of a strange feature of the brain's architecture. The number of neural connections carrying signals from deep within the brain and toward the eyes and other sensory organs are actually about 4 times more than signals running from the eyes and back. And this wiring runs in the opposite direction of the model, suggesting that the brain is just a passive receiver of sensory information. Doesn't really make sense. Why would the brain have this neural wiring going from the brain to the senses if we're passive receiving the information? So this actually have resulted in the model of the brain being changed or updated. Our understanding has been modified and changed in recent years. And we now know that the brain is constantly guessing what to see. It's guessing or predicting what to see, hear, feel, and experience. And this actually helps us navigate effectively in the world. And this is illustrated in the hollow mask illusion that you might have seen. And as you can see here, the brain is actually not allowing us to see the backside of the mask, simply because we've never seen a backside of a face before. And as such, the brain does not have a prediction for that. It doesn't really know what to guess, and as such is not allowing us to see the sensory information. And the same goes for our perception of the body, what we call interoception. So signals from the body, such as activity in nociceptors, are neither necessary nor sufficient to experience a symptom, which is exactly why you can get very real pain when hit with a hammer on a fake arm that the brain believes is your own arm. And this image that you see here depicts the rubber hand illusion, which is a phenomenon where the brain is deceived into perceiving a rubber hand as part of the body. So the hand that you see on your left side is actually the fake arm under the hammer. And this intriguing illusion is showcased on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, I encourage all of you to go and look it up after this on YouTube. Look at the Netflix version. And yes, it is a sort of a show, but it actually is grounded in solid scientific research. We actually see this phenomenon in the lab. So the same goes for fatigue and other symptoms. And in this study, this just the sound of a metronome that people had learned to associate with a very demanding cognitive task triggered real fatigue. So by coupling the sound of a metronome, you know how that sounds, with a fatigue state that participants were experiencing after hours of cognitive testing. So they were doing really heavy stuff, arithmetic and other cognitive demanding tasks. And that when they were at the most severely fatigued, the experimenters introduced the sound of a metronome to half of the participants and not the others. And when all these participants came back the day after and were introduced to the sound of a metronome, suddenly the half that had been associated with the fatigue suddenly started feeling fatigue, inexplainable fatigue. So why does the brain do this to us? Well, symptoms like fatigue, pain, and nausea are actually there to protect us. So the brain actually tries to do its best to protect us and create symptoms whenever it believes or expects there to be a reason for us to feel symptoms. And to make this decision, the brain uses several sources of information, signals from the body, but also other sources of information such as the previous experience or information from the situation. So the signals from the body is just actually one source of information. And the brain is constantly bombarded with information. There's a lot of information coming to the brain all the time, both from the outside world and from the inner world in our bodies. And in this myriad of information, the brain must choose and prioritize what to pay attention to. And to do this, it uses expectations. So through expectations, it is always one step ahead. And in that way, the only information the brain needs to pay attention to is what we call prediction errors. That is, when there is a mismatch between the expectation, the guessing, and the input, in which case the brain updates the expectation and moves on. But sometimes things go wrong. Our expectations can become so strong and dominant that they completely override the signals or lack of signals coming from the body. And to give you a real example of this, we know that across studies, about 1 in 4 experience side effects from placebo. So they get a sugar pill, that they believe may be the active treatment with possible effects and side effects, and they experience and report these side effects, which are purely driven by expectations. And the experience of these symptoms or side effects is the same and just as real, but the cause is different. And a different cause means a different treatment. So how can this explain PEM? So I propose here 2 mechanisms tying into what I've been saying. Associative learning, where subconscious expectations link exertion to fatigue, and attribution, involving conscious expectations and interpretations about the cause of PEM, how you interpret and respond to PEM. So to do the first things first, I hope you're familiar with Pavlov. He was a famous scientist who accidentally noticed that when he connected a neutral stimulus, so a bell sound that you see here, with food serving, the dogs actually began to associate the bell with food, and they started salivating just at the sound of the bell, even without food being present. So this is called classical conditioning. And it happens outside of our conscious control, completely automatic, and it happens to all of us all the time, animals as well as humans. And I don't know if you've ever experienced food poisoning. I have. And if you have, you know that a severe attack of food poisoning, if you've had that, just the sight or smell of a perfectly fine but similar fish days, weeks, or months later can trigger symptoms such as nausea and discomfort. Or like my cancer patient who had learned to associate the hospital with the severe nausea from chemotherapy months later, but just by the side of the hospital, she started getting nauseous and throwing up. These symptoms are real, you are not imagining them, and they are not under your direct voluntary control. It's a conditioned response. So like the salivating dog, the brain learns to associate exertion with fatigue, and anything can be conditioned and can as such trigger symptoms. And that can actually also explain the high variability that we see in patients, where anything almost can trigger this PEM reaction, whether it is mental exertion or physical exertion. And this variability does not really fit within a biomedical model, but it fits perfectly within a classical conditioning model. The second proposed mechanism relates to the expectations and interpretation of the causes of PEM. In other words, how do you interpret symptom flare-ups, and what does that imply? So we know that all experience symptoms that we all experience occur along a continuum of objectivity. And sometimes the brain is mistaking noise, which is normal bodily processes, for symptoms. And strong expectations about a sick body may increase the likelihood of such mistakes. And when symptoms are experienced, they often will be interpreted as caused by exertion, even if the assumed activity happened hours or days earlier. So what does this do? Well, this attribution actually signals danger to the brain. And that means that the alarm goes off and stays on as long as the brain perceives danger, which is perfectly rational from the brain's perspective. So if this is true, it follows that a different attribution and expectations and a reinterpretation of bodily signals should result in weakened or eliminated PEM. And I'll leave it up to the next speaker, Rebecca, to talk further about how this could be done. Thank you for the attention so far.
Celia, that's fantastic. I wish that I had heard that, in the middle of the pandemic when I was really ill. And it makes perfect sense in terms of what happened to me, was that I now believe, if I look back, it was never about running or cycling. It's just that I happened to be doing a lot of that when I got sick. And so it was just a very easy thing to blame, because you're so ill and you're in so much fear and you're so desperate to find out what could be causing all these symptoms that you look for the thing that you've done. And then, I went on long COVID groups, and the narrative was that exercise was bad. And then I looked at the media and I looked at NHS websites, and they also told me that exercise was bad. And then I believed that I'd done it to myself. And then every time I tried to exercise, which was my identity and the most important thing that I wanted to do, of course, I got symptoms. But what's interesting is that they were only outside and only when I was measuring. So I was actually able to walk inside the house quite well towards the end. So yeah, it doesn't appear that the energy narrative doesn't make sense. Whereas if I put it through the lens of a conditioned response and then about expectation, and those two things coupled together, that really makes a lot of sense. Fiona.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a neat explanation. And I suppose, when I was ill, what I was hearing from other patients and from charities was, there's something broken in the body that we haven't yet found. And maybe it's your mitochondria, and maybe it's your immune system. And what I never understood was, well, then how can my symptoms change maybe in one day or in 1 week? And it's so interesting to see that this idea explains perfectly why you see your symptoms varying and really varying a lot sometimes. And maybe there isn't something broken after all in the body.
And Celia, can I ask a question? Because there's a lot of talk about, not triggering PEM, and if you do trigger PEM, that it's going to be permanent and it's going to cause permanent damage. I don't know if you can talk at all in terms of that, because that's the fear then, and that sort of stops you, that alters your behavior. So I don't know if you can say any more in terms of that.
Yeah, and I said that sort of perception, that expectations, signals to the brain that there is something dangerous here, and that will set off the alarm. and the symptoms will go off and be experienced. But there is really no evidence that there is any damage happening to the body, or that there is any sort of injury to be structural injury to be worried about in terms of this. And it's actually more and more evidence coming forward now that really sort of documents this, even in these patient populations that we're talking about here, like CFSME and long COVID. It seems to be safe, but it has to be done in a wise way, because the brain is trying to protect us. So we have to sort of, to do it in a wise way, not just pushing through, because that can actually make things worse.
Thank you. Which leads us, I think, nicely to Becca and Dr. Rebecca Kennedy, because you obviously deal with patients and you help them get better. How do you do that?
So all of this is not intuitive, because what's intuitive is damage in the body causing symptoms in the body. So if we sprain our ankle, we can predict in a linear way what's going to happen. The pain gets better little by little as it's healing. And if we go out and we walk on it for a mile and the pain gets worse, the tissue injury has worsened. It's not healing, so we get off of it, and then it gets better in a predictable linear way. So when it's the brain, that it's fear in the unconscious brain is what's creating the symptoms. And it's a neural pathway, the signal that's being sent down that's creating our experience. And when it's the brain, that's what creates this pattern that doesn't make sense for damage in the body, where you can do the activity. If you have a sprained ankle and you walk on it, it's going to hurt when you're walking on it. It's not going to hurt the day later and not hurt while you're walking on it. It's also not going to hurt because you have cognitive exercise or emotional exercise, and those things can also turn on the physical symptoms. And with PEM, sometimes it's fatigue, or often it's fatigue, but it can be lots of different symptoms as well. It can be dizziness and nausea and pain and lots of other symptoms that the brain makes. So the solution also is not intuitive. And so the solution is teaching the unconscious brain that it doesn't really need to be fearing what it thinks it's fearing. And we can only do that by showing it. I mean, we can think it cognitively, and that's part of it. And our brain is paying attention to our thoughts, but that often isn't enough. So it's leaning into it and showing our brain. But again, like Celia was saying, is that if we just jump into it too much without the understanding, then we can make the fear worse, and then we're stuck in this fear symptom loop. And I think that's often what happens if people don't understand the science. Because again, what's intuitive is I have these really debilitating symptoms that are taking me out of life. I can't even get out of bed. How could I not have damage in my body, right? That's not intuitive. But understanding that our brain makes the experience, just like Celia talked about. So instead of staying in bed, resting, so our body can heal, like makes sense when there's structural damage in the body, it's showing the brain that our body's not actually damaged. Yes, there are biochemical changes. That's what our brain signaling does. Does all this very complex medical, biochemical, chemical signal in our body. Absolutely. But the root of it is the brain determining or perceiving, are we in danger and there's fear, or are we safe? So we're putting the cart before the horse. Again, with a sprained ankle, you wait for the pain to get better before you then walk on it again. So you wait for the symptom to go away before you then use it. So this is different. We have to use our bodies first while we have the symptoms, while we connect those symptoms with safe signals, so that we're showing our unconscious brain, look, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm actually not damaged. And as we do that as a process over time, somewhere out there in the future, our brain finally learns that, okay, I don't need to give this protective warning signal. And so we can't control what our unconscious brain is doing directly. So we can't control the symptoms in our body, and we can't control our automatic thoughts. But what we can control or I don't like that word, but what we do have agency over is our response to those. So if we can stop responding through fear and we can respond through self-compassion and science and understanding, then we can lower that fear response. And when we're lowering the fear response over time, that's what rewires those neural pathways and changes them. So I think of it sort of like if you fell off a roof and broke both your legs as a child, and your unconscious brain has learned to associate being at a height with fear. So it's much like the graded exposure of going to a height, is that you have to go to a little bit of a height and experience that with the fear symptoms in place, and then respond to them differently, couple them with safe signals. Joy can be really helpful. Our brain has difficulty both experiencing joy and fear at the same time. And yes, it is not easy to experience joy when you have overwhelming symptoms, absolutely. But where you can find the littlest bit of joy, or go with a friend, or listen to music, or smile, or tell yourself safe signals that I'm okay, this is just my brain. This is just my brain. And soothe your brain like you would soothe a child that's afraid of the storm outside. You're not going to be mad at it or push it away, but really bring it in and be kind to it, and even listen to it and say, what are you trying to protect me from? I appreciate that, but I'm okay. And so again, the more that you connect with your symptoms and respond to them without the fear, is rewiring the signals slowly over time.
Becca, that's amazing. I wish I'd known you when I was really ill and you'd sat down and told me that. I did work out somehow that joy was really important, and looking at what I could do rather than what I couldn't do. And I sat in my garden for months looking at the birds making nests, which I've never done in the rest of my adult life. And I did also work out eventually somehow that incrementally increasing activity was the way forward. I'd met someone who'd recovered, and they'd recovered by gradually exposing themselves to, walking to the end of their road and back, and breathing.
And that's actually, I wanted, and actually I just wanted to say a little thing about that. Is it's really deciding for you where that range is.
Yeah.
And so where is it that your brain brings in fear a little bit, but not necessarily a huge amount? So if you're afraid of heights, you're not going to start bungee jumping. You're going to start with maybe visualization, or maybe going to a little, to the side of a bridge. And so wherever that range is for you. And so some of my patients, again, they just start with visualizing, and visualizing doing the activity with ease and joy. And when the fear messages come in, responding to those with, that's just my brain. That's just my brain. And then as you can push, like you're saying, push into it a little bit. So if you want to start cycling again, maybe it's you have your bike there with you while you watch TV at night, so that conditioned learned response of that stimuli to your brain gets rewired. And then maybe you sit on your bike for 5 minutes, or some of my patients actually go out biking for half an hour initially, because that's where the fear of their brain is. So the amount that you can do with your body does not have to do with your body. It has to do with the fear in your brain. That's it. I mean, yes, people are going to be deconditioned, no doubt, but it's really about the fear in your brain. And if you lean into it and you do whatever activity and the symptoms just go through the roof, then responding to it, well, that was too much for the fear in my brain. So maybe deciding, maybe I'll dial it back a little bit. But again, doing that through understanding, self-compassion, rather than, oh my gosh, I have to not do that again. That was terrible. I can't. That's responding through fear. So just understanding to dial it back. And it's complicated because where that line is can be different every day, also because of lots of different factors. But again, the more that we can just understand that, be kind to ourselves, and just little by little kind of try these different things and open it up can get us there.
Yeah, Becca, I mean, I'm going to go to Fiona in a minute, but my journey was kind of two parts where I was doing the incremental, and that's hard because you don't know when you're increasing how much to increase and will I get payback. And then I actually did a brain retraining course, and I'm sat like here as I am with you all now. And I just had this paradigm shift, and I suddenly realized that it was never about the activity. It was my expectation and my viewpoint on the activity and my thoughts around it. And I decided, not everyone does this, I decided to go for broke. So having not been on my bike for the entire year, I got on my bike, cycled for 30 minutes, got my heart rate up to 180. I decided if I was going to go for it, I needed to test it. I got the worst symptoms about 6 hours later, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. However, I was so clear. It was like someone had told me that the world was round when I thought it was flat. I was so clear that I knew what it was, that I managed to somehow tell myself that I had a choice and talk myself down and use every breathing and meditation technique and all those messages of safety. And I felt like I was this hero in the hero's journey, and that had to almost go through the fear in order to get to the other side, and told myself that. And it worked. And once you kind of realize that, once you know that you're kind of on that path, there were still some wobbles for months afterwards, but I felt like I was on that path. Fiona, what was your experience?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I just wanted to pick up on before I've got a couple of things I'd love to say, but really this thing about the fear, and it's so funny listening to this now because I understand it now, and I've done enough work, also through a brain retraining course, and I'm fully recovered, and I've gone through those early days of rebuilding things and learning that I'm okay to do things. But when I first heard about this idea that fear was involved, I remember being actually quite offended and saying, well, I'm not frightened. I'm not frightened of exercise. I don't have anything to be scared of. And it really took some work to step back and to say, well, actually, maybe I need to look at these symptoms if they're coming up. That is the brain expressing fear, and to slightly take a different approach and to tune into myself. And I think the thing that really came up was, if you are living with post-exertional malaise, it is absolutely natural to be scared of exercise because that's what has triggered symptoms. And so it's a healthy response to be frightened, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't then work on that. So I think it's very important, if you do have that defensive reaction initially, is just to sit with that and look at what's behind that, and say that, I don't think I knew that I was frightened, but it turns out that I was, and it turns out that actually, living with many years of symptoms it's traumatic on one level, and your brain is likely holding on to fear. So I think that's a really important thing to sort of allow some space for when you're looking into all of this. But you talked about repetition, and my experience, I had this very early experience of I was doing my brain retraining. I knew it was starting to work, but I had been inactive for such a long time, and it was such a big deal to start to say, okay, I need to start moving a bit more and see what happens, and see if these exercises I'm learning can make the symptoms change. I was still a bit skeptical, and there was a very a sort of long track behind the house, and that had a very slight incline. We're talking a really small, I wouldn't call it a hill, it was a very, very small incline, and I walked down to the end of that, and that was somewhere that I wouldn't have walked when I was ill. I had a wheelchair outside of the house, and that was enough. It was enough of a slope that I would have crashed walking on it. So I got myself to the end of that track, and I started to get some symptoms. And there was only one way back to the house. I was stuck. I was on my own, and I stopped there where I was, and I closed my eyes, and I actually used visualization at that moment. I tried to think about, well, what's the thing that would actually make me feel really happy? What's the thing I would love to do? And I thought about roller skating, which I hadn't done obviously since I was a child, but that seemed to be the most fun, amazing thing that I could visualize. So I had my eyes shut, and I was picturing myself roller skating, and I was trying to really think about what does it feel like to have that joy, and work through some of the exercises I've been taught, and my symptoms cleared. And actually I went back to the house and I made it. And I think that was this incredibly exciting moment of this actually might work. And I built in that visualization sort of over the following weeks. And the thing I came back to actually was myself looking really healthy and strong and fit and on a bike. And I tried to sort of play around with it, and I pictured myself having red lipstick, because again, that sort of, to me, it sort of gave me this feeling of, well, you'd only be it would sort of be a sign that you're a healthy, happy human being if you were cycling with red lipstick on. So I came back to that a lot, and it was just such a wonderful thing. And I'd only really known myself as an ill person for a very long time. So it was, something I would have dismissed when I was ill. I would have said, how can me thinking about being well do anything? But it's amazing how when you build these exercises up and you do them over and over and over, and you're repeating them and you're showing your brain, where you want to go, I think that is absolutely just so powerful. And here I am, and I'm well, and I do ride my bike. I've been on my bike today riding to work, and I work full time, and I've been able to hike, and I've been able to swim and do all sorts of things. I haven't actually done any roller skating yet. That's still on the cards. I need to get myself out there at some point and do it properly. But these ideas, they sound like they couldn't possibly work, and they do, and I'm proof of that, and I'm so happy that that's the case, because it's been life-changing.
Yeah, and if anyone hasn't seen Fiona's story, I recommend it. You might cry. It's just the most powerful story, Fiona. And you talk also about the fact that someone comes to your door a couple of days later and your skin color has changed and you look well. So physically,
it was extraordinary, because I'd started these exercises and it was a very big shift for me to even try them. I'd been so resistant to the idea that, I didn't want to think my symptoms were all in my head. I'd done a course of sort of an ME course that had bits of CBT in it, and it hadn't worked. And I was very, very clear that I had a physical illness, and I was going to have to wait for research and some medication to help me. And so I'd started these exercises. I knew, there was something in them, and I was sort of starting to get excited, but this was very early on, and somebody came to the door. This was a dog walker, and he looked at me, and before I'd said anything, he said, "You're getting better." And I'd known him for a while, and I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Your color has completely changed from the last time I saw you." And he'd seen me, out in a wheelchair, out on my mobility scooter. He knew me as somebody ill. And that's what's so extraordinary, I think, is that, obviously I know my symptoms were real. I know I wasn't making them up, but sometimes it's hard to convince other people that these symptoms are real. But there are physical signs. I know, I have the objective evidence that my heart rate was going up, and my color was sometimes I was very, very pale. I looked very ill, and it was one of the first things that changed, that the color came back into my face, and my eyes looked different, and my heart rate settled, and all these very physical changes.
Yeah,
That's
what
so
an amazing
amazing.
story. So we've got time for some questions, and I think everyone's just intently been listening, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So maybe we'll go old school, and if anyone wants to put a hand up, and I can invite you in. Has anyone got any
And
questions?
as people, yeah, please ask questions. And as people are sort of thinking about them, I did want to make another comment really quick. Is often the question comes up about the difference between pacing and graded exposure. And from my experience, I think that a lot of pacing is very fear-inducing. It's, oh, you got to be careful, you got to be calculated, do 80% of what you're doing. If you don't, you're paid for it, you're doing damage, you're going to crash. So it's this, and it's also kind of put upon you by someone else, and all of this, and really thinking about it differently is that, again, through understanding, self-compassion, joy, that you're just sort of through curiosity, you're leaning into it. And if the symptoms go through the roof, like with Rachel, you're like, all right, well, that was too much for my brain. I'm still glad that I did that today. Yay, me, I did that today. But, maybe I'll diet back a little. And so again, really thinking about it through that and deciding. I've said to a patient, like, oh, he's like, can I go bike ride? How much should I do? Like, what you want.
Yeah,
Go and do what you want to do. And I think having that self-agency and that joy part of it. So
Yeah, that choice and the agency of you as an individual. We've got loads of hands, so I think I'd never make a referee, but I think we've got Louise, then Jason, then Katie, then Jake, then Phil, and that probably is our time. So Louise.
Hi, thanks so much. What a wonderful resource this is going to be for people. And so great to hear everyone sharing. I work primarily with people with fatigue, and I've had kind of my own journey with post-exertional malaise. And something I see in my groups and also in the wider ME community is this idea that people hear this, and then sometimes it can be misinterpreted as, oh, it's just my brain. It's just my brain's opinion. I'm fine. And then what we see in that situation is that people then push, they do the thing, they get the PEM, they think, oh, it's just my brain, and they push. And of course, it pushes them into more and more PEM, a big crash. And then the result of that is that they think, oh, this won't work for me. I've got a physical disease. And in a small group, in the way that I work, I can spot that and I can say, look, you're pushing. That's not what this is about. Let's come back to the compassion, like Rebecca said, building that safety first. But I just wonder how we might speak to that in the wider community to make sure that this, amazing stuff is not interpreted, because then if it is misinterpreted and someone crashes, it wouldn't be right to say, well, you did it wrong, you didn't get it, it's your fault. And so I wonder just how we might speak to, how do we ensure that message gets across, that it's about building the safety first before we then increase the activity.
Well, I guess just from my perspective, a couple of thoughts, but other people, is that even saying if they crash, then we did something wrong. But I think the point is understanding that it's normal. The symptoms go up and down, and that's normal. So it's not about we have to do everything we can to avoid a crash. That's not what we're doing. Is that we're slowly pushing into it, and we're understanding, a crash. Although really thinking about it with different language, I think can be more helpful. Like, this is a normal pattern. This is an opportunity for my brain to learn. And so I think it's really about that education that's important for people to understand all these different pieces.
Thank you, Becca. Thanks, Louise. Jason.
Hi, thank you so much for an excellent presentation for the entire panel. I guess what I'm curious about, and I don't know who this would come from, maybe everyone, how do you have a therapy that appears to be effective for many individuals, but you also have a barrier to individuals being open to that kind of approach because of what they perceive that it might mean. What is the best way to bridge that gap? How do we, in an effective, appropriate way, engage people in this idea that they can try this approach, which seems entirely counterintuitive to their experiences, to what they're hearing online, to all of the information in their environment?
Who's going to answer that?
So I think I think we need to start communicating a different message online. I think we need to be more out there, and I think we need to communicate this sort of the new science, our new understanding of not only PEM, but of the brain's role in producing and constructing all symptoms, and how that sometimes can go wrong and what we can do about it. So I think spreading the message, I think spreading, showing examples, I think that's really, really powerful. There's nothing as powerful as a good example, a story that we heard today to change people's minds. So I think getting the message out, spreading it, finding better language to bridge the gap between the mind and the body. I think we are really constricted by our way of speaking about this, like physical or psychological. It doesn't really make sense in terms of how the brain works. So I believe in spreading the news through both communicating scientific explanations, but also examples.
Yeah, which is where me and Fiona have come in terms of just sharing our stories. Fiona, you've obviously come off mute.
Yeah, I think we you know, it's not a nice answer, but we need to be patient. I think it's going to take time, unfortunately, as much as we'd all like it to be quick. And I think the crucial thing is, you know, when people get it, it's standing together, I think, and putting out a message in a way that, you know, we're trying to help people actually at heart. And some people have been treated very badly by friends and family, sometimes the medical profession, and there's a lot of fear. And it's just actually, I think the more that we're all standing together and saying, actually, these ideas might help and they're worth a try, and there's lots of people you can talk to if you want to have a go, but it is going to take, you know, it's going to take time, and we do need to go somewhat slowly, I think.
Thank you, Fiona. I hate to break it, but I don't think we'll get through all the questions, but it's brilliant that everyone has hands up. Katie, but we are all, you know, you're able to be in touch with us afterwards as well. Katie, what's your question?
Yeah, I'll try to make it brief. I definitely have seen the power of, you know, visualizing a better, healthier, weller version of yourself. And I've also seen time and time again people really struggling with even that possibility and that concept. So I'm wondering if either Fiona or Rachel, if either of you could speak to that, if you were ever in a place where you're just like, I can't even dream of it because I know it's not going to happen, or I know it's not real, or, you know, that.
Yeah, I think I was lucky because I came across some of these ideas quite early on in my journey, which is just luck into, you know, whereas Fiona, I know that you will have spent years thinking that it was not possible.
I was very resistant. I was very, you know, at an early stage of my journey, I met people who were saying, don't trust doctors, don't you know, don't believe that this is all in your head, which is obviously not the message we're giving out today at all. And there's a lot of confusion, and I was very, very resistant. And I think that, you know, if I could have yeah, I want to say that things could have been very different, and it's one of the reasons I'm speaking out. I don't want other people to lose 14 years like I did, or even longer. You know, there's lots of people who've been a lot longer. So, you know, that fear and that resistance is a big problem, and I understand it. I'm so glad something got through to me, and I'm a real believer in the fact that, you know, if I can change my mind, other people can change their minds as well. It is possible, but it's very challenging, and particularly when there is that fear involved of people are just trying to say to me that my symptoms aren't real and that I'm exaggerating them and I'm catastrophizing, and it's actually, that's not what the message is. It's about coming back to the brain, and how does the brain, you know, operate for human beings actually as a sort of safety mechanism. So yeah, it's realizing what the core message is actually, and it's definitely not about saying to people that this is all in your head.
Yeah, totally. And I think I was lucky. I put a thing on Facebook talking about how awful long COVID was, and I was lucky that I had two friends who'd had ME and had recovered, who then contacted me, and that changed everything, because I thought ME was completely incurable, and then suddenly there were two people, and you know, so I got lucky. But it's sharing stories again. Jake.
Oh, hi there. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for some amazing contributions. Much appreciated. Yeah, I'm Jake. I'm a psychologist. I'm recovering myself from long COVID and ME/CFS, and I've made tremendous progress with a lot of thanks to these ideas. So I'm definitely on board with them. I really appreciate, Celia, your contribution around predictive processing, which is something that I've been fascinated with and trying to get my head around. And I wonder if I could just ask a little more. So I understand this idea that, you know, our expectations, or the brain's expectations, can override signals from the body, and that typically a prediction error would help update the brain to understand that actually, you know, these danger signals aren't warranted anymore. So why do you think that does not happen with these conditions? Why is the prediction error not sufficient to kind of re-regulate, recreate homeostasis?
So that's a big question, and I think there are, you know, people on the call here that could also respond very well to that. But I think that you know, there's this model talking about these systems having these principles of better safe than sorry. So these are, all the symptoms that we have, whether it is pain or fatigue, it's alarm systems. That it's better that the alarm goes off one time too much than one time, too little. And in some people, these systems seems to be more sensitive than others. And in this particular context, that was not functional or was not helpful for the person. But in another context, hundreds of years ago, that might have secured their survival. So it's also context specific. So I also want to say that these systems are there to protect us. But they work on a sort of better safe than sorry principle, and in some cases it's just too sensitive, and it could also be contextually factors. There's a great paper talking about the perfect storm that COVID was for many. So all these factors coming together, creating the perfect storm that made the alarm just sustain and stay on. So, and I think that could be highly variable also on an individual level, but contextual factors along with predispositions could predispose some to have these sort of reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I know myself, I was in high alert, I was quite anxious, I was stressed. So, there was that. I went for a run, and I remember now my mum said, don't go for a run, you'll get post-viral fatigue. And so that was in my head. I then read some newspapers about people recovering from COVID, and then, a week later being even iller. And so I think all of those things in terms of nocebo also sort of fed into this perfect storm. Dr. Phil Parker.
Thank you very much. Fabulous conversation. Really good to be here. I just wanted to make one point, which is kind of keeps on coming up for me. So Fiona said a really interesting thing. She said, I kind of had this whole conversation about my symptoms are caused by fear, and it doesn't feel right. And reinterpreting it's actually maybe it's a signal from the brain. And I think the word fear is a really important one, and that taps into something that Louise said about how do we make sure people don't feel blamed, what Jason said about how do we communicate this. And I was doing some research into, people said to me, I love roller coasters. My sister must be in fear all day long in an amusement park, but I don't feel ill at the end of the day. So how does that work if fear is such a bad thing? So I looked at some of the research, and it turns out there's a thing called threat response or challenge response. And the threat response is not good for you. A challenge response is like an adventure. So in the amusement park, you have the challenge response. And the threat response is identified as feeling that you don't have the capacity or the resources to deal with an event. And I think that might be a really useful word instead of fear, that we're kind of experiencing these things as threat. And that might just slightly reduce the kind of emotional content of it, and just it's like your body's experiencing something as danger. So that was something that just kept on coming up to me, is how do we communicate this? So that's my thought. I hope that's useful.
Certainly the language makes a huge difference, doesn't it? I started calling PEM, I stopped using the word PEM, I started talking about wobbles or dips, and again, it just felt less significant then. I'm going to finish with Julie, because I know she's had her hands up. And then we need to close, because it's not good practice if you say you're going to finish at a certain time not to do that. So Julie, where's Julie gone?
Hi. Yeah, sorry, this isn't necessarily a quick question to answer, but so this discussion has been fantastic, but a lot of that is still essentially putting the onus on the individual patient to find all this and work all this out and apply it to themselves. And I know that there are resources out there that can help, and I know that there are brain retraining courses, etc. But with any other illness, we wouldn't expect to have to work all that out for ourselves. And I also know that there's a whole process, and medical recommendations and advice and practice should be evidence-based, and I'm not at all proposing that we undermine that, but I just wondered if there's something else that can be done in the meantime to try and help the medical community to understand all of this, and that that they wouldn't be telling their patients it's all in the head, but how to have that understanding for themselves and then be able to communicate that to patients in a way that's helpful. Is there something that can be done in the meantime around that?
Becca, I know that you're putting some information in the chat, so I'm going to give you that question, and then we'll start.
Happy to answer it. It's hard. I mean, this is a paradigm shift in thinking, and it's not just that doctors are resistant or they're not going to make money, or it's that this idea is too big for a human brain to wrap itself around easily. Sort of like Rachel talked about that. I mean, it's on scope of that the world is round versus the world is flat. I mean, it's such a big idea that, like, when I try to talk to the leaders and other physicians at Kaiser, for instance, they think they understand what it is, and because of prediction, our brains put it into that box, and they think I'm teaching people to meditate and calm their nervous system, and then that's it. And so it takes time. There's a lot of resources. I'm on the board of the Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms organization, which used to be called the PPDA. And we're trying to be a central hub for getting a lot of these resources, and a lot of the resources are free, even lots of things online, books, lots of places to get this. But I mean, I agree with you, and I say this to my patients a lot, is it's not your job to figure this out. It's really the doctor's job to figure it out, but we haven't up until this point. So,
thank you, Becca. And we're kind of out of time, but I know that I speak for Fiona. We're available, aren't we? So, anyone is welcome to contact any of the speakers. Also, we're planning to run this kind of event every 6 months. And so we would love ideas in terms of further subjects. Before you go, if you're able to put any ideas, things that you want to know more about in the chats, that would be amazing. Claire, I know that you've got a couple of things also to say as well. Where's Claire in Australia?
Hi, everybody. I just would like to release, so thank you everyone for joining. Such an amazing turn up. We had over 100 people registering for this event, and it's amazing to see that more than half have showed up. So I just wanted to release a quick feedback poll. It's just a brief poll on 2 questions, just to collect some feedback on this seminar today. So I'll go ahead and launch that now. And once the recording is downloaded, I can circulate that to everyone here and everyone who's RSVP'd for the event. And as Rachel said, please feel free to circulate that to your relevant networks. It'd be much appreciated. And in the chat, I've also included the COFFI Collaborative Outlook email. If you're interested in knowing and keeping up to date with any online seminars, events, or sending through any ideas for upcoming workshops, please contact me there. Thanks, Rachel.
And thank you. And on behalf of all the speakers, just thank you. Thank you for showing up. It's amazingly powerful to be able to talk about this. So thank you.